I am so excited to have on the podcast today Gayle Nagle and Maura Duignan from the Sligo Sudbury School in Sligo, Ireland. The Sligo Sudbury School is one of dozens of Sudbury-style schools around the world that are modeled after the original Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts, that was founded in 1968. You may remember that in episode 39, back in October, I interviewed Sudbury Valley co-founder Mimsy Sadofsky. I also wrote extensively about Sudbury Valley and the Sudbury model of self-directed education in my Unschooled book, and my 3 younger children attend the Sudbury Valley School here in Massachusetts. So I am eager to talk with Gayle and Maura about what drew them to the Sudbury model. Gayle Nagle co-founded Sligo Sudbury School and has worked there as a staff member since it opened in 2018. Prior to launching her school, Gayle worked for many years in education as an administrator, teacher, and school principal. She was also lucky to attend a school from ages 5 to 18 that was modeled after the famed Summerhill School in England, kind of the original non-coercive self-directed education school that was founded in 1921 by A.S. Neal and continues to operate today more than a century later. In 1960, Neal's book, Summerhill School, A New View of Childhood, was first published, selling over 2 million copies in its first decade in print and inspiring a generation of authors and educators, including the founders of the flagship Sudbury Valley School. For Maura Duignan, it was homeschooling her 2 sons that led her to become more interested in children's learning and development and to discover the work of renowned educator and author John Holt, who coined the term unschooling in 1977, as well as Boston College psychology professor Peter Gray, who wrote the book Free to Learn, and who also wrote the foreword to my Unschooled book. Maura has an undergraduate degree in English and Italian and a master's degree in Italian. She has traveled extensively around the world and believes that children should be empowered from early on to determine their path. She co-founded the Sligo Sudbury School with Gayle back in 2018. And so I'm very excited to have both of you here today, Gayle and Maura. I'm just thrilled to have you on the LiberatED podcast. And I want to start with you, Gayle, because your background as a child and a teenager attending a Summerhill-inspired school probably set the groundwork, I would imagine, for your vision for what would become eventually the Sligo Sudbury School. So maybe we can start there with what it was like to attend a self-directed school that was modeled after Summerhill.
It was incredible. To me, it was just normal, to be honest. That's what school was. And it wasn't really until, I mean, I always knew, I was aware that it was it was a very special place and a little bit unique. But I suppose it wasn't really until I went back to train to be a teacher, went back to college and went through the training system and started teaching and working in lots of other schools around Dublin, that I realized how very special it was, I think, and the underpinning principles that were just kind of normal for us, the cornerstones of that system, which were, respect was very deeply embedded in that school, choice. Now, it was still a mainstream school and we still followed the state curriculum, and as time went on and as the years went by, I suppose it became more mainstream than when it was originally founded. But the philosophy, I think, remained there, and certainly amongst the original staff members and the staff members that had worked there in the early years, that concept of equality and choice and respect was very much embedded in the school. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. I absolutely adored my schooling, and it probably inspired me to work in education as an adult as well. But I did also go and visit Summerhill, so I have been there, but not for my entire childhood. But when we started on this path, I was very aware of Summerhill growing up, obviously, as it was kind of the school that our school was modelled on, and went to visit it then a couple of years ago for one of their open days, which was incredible to see it all in action. And that was before we'd opened our school here. So yeah, just seeing the school meeting, just the grounds, the people, the atmosphere, the feeling, how the staff and students interacted with each other and how it just all worked. So it just felt so natural, and the flow was so, lovely place to be. So yeah.
So I want to get to your story in a moment, Maura, but just one other question for you, Gayle. So coming from that kind of self-directed school modeled after Summerhill, spending your childhood and adolescence there, and then going into more of a conventional experience as an educator, what struck you the most in terms of that contrast?
I think it was just that. It was that it was the dependence and the hidden curriculum, as it was called in a lecture that we had in college at one point, that what I suppose the messages we were really giving to the children were about, that they weren't really capable, I suppose, to lead their own learning. Even in the more open-minded and the more progressive schools that I worked in, that undermining principle, I suppose, was there, that teacher's teacher and teacher knows best, and I don't think I had a sense of that growing up in the school that I went to. Now, it wasn't purely a self-directed school. We did follow a curriculum, and it was, by the time I was leaving there, it had become quite mainstream, but in the same breath, there was always a sense of responsibility and individualism, and we were expected, there was high expectations on us to I suppose to lead our own learning to us as far as we could, to a certain degree. So I suppose, yeah, it was just, the difference was maybe the dependence that we're kind of training into children, maybe in mainstream schools. I didn't feel that, I suppose, growing up. And yeah, some of the other the kind of the hidden curriculum, the ideas of my mind's complete. Just the compliance and the behavioral management tools, all of those things that were kind of normal in all the other schools that I observed and worked in. There was an awful lot less of that for me growing up. So it always jarred with me a little bit, I think, from when I started working in mainstream. And I was always kind of thinking that maybe there was a better way, or obviously I'd had that experience myself. So it wasn't a difficult move or step for me to move out of there and move kind of back towards a self-directed type system.
Really interesting. And I appreciate, again, both of you being with me today. I know it's just the beginning of my day here, the end of your day in Sligo. So really appreciate that after a long day at your school, to take some time to talk with us. And Maura, I'm curious about your path to self-directed education and the Sudbury model. You said that it was through homeschooling your two sons that you discovered this approach to learning. Tell us a little bit about that evolution and how you came to this model.
Sure. Well, my eldest child actually started mainstream school, and wasn't even aware that there was another way to educate a child at first. But like you said in my bio, I like to travel, and I wanted to be able to travel with the children when they were small and take them out of school, which was no problem when they were small, except the teacher gave me a whole lot of work that he had to keep up with while we were away. And it seemed so arbitrary and so out of sync, really, the tasks that he was being required to learn while we were traveling and doing things that were way more interesting to him and way more natural in the context of our life. And slowly, I began to question really what we were doing. And so then accidentally, really, I discovered the concept of that one could actually homeschool, that was legal in our country. And so that was the first step. And then I suppose it's just a process of self-directed learning. You explore something new, and through my children learning themselves and looking for resources for them and exploring other ways to support them with their interests, I became exposed to lots of other people doing the same thing and other ideas. And eventually, as I said, to the work of John Holt and particularly Peter Gray, then, who actually came to Ireland and spoke at a conference. And that's really where I was introduced to the idea of the Sudbury School, which to me just seemed like the most perfect solution. It's a combination of the freedom of homeschooling with the community of other people doing something similar, because that was one of the big drawbacks really with homeschooling as an individual, especially in a rural community. As the children grew older, that became a bit of a challenge finding companionship and like-minded people to sort of, you know, explore activities together or interests together. And then, as luck would have it, I bumped into Gayle one day through the homeschooling network, and we had a meeting of minds, kind of.
Amazing. I love that story of moving, you know, kind of seeing what was working for your family, appreciating the freedom and flexibility of homeschooling, and then discovering self-directed education in the Sudbury model from that, and then meeting Gayle. So Gayle, take us through the steps to creating the Sligo Sudbury School, from your first idea, the vision for it, to opening your doors in 2018. What was that process like?
Well, it was an amazing process. Yeah, as Maura said, it started with, well, I suppose we were both kind of philosophically had started the journey by the time we met each other. My two younger children, they were unschooling, homeschooling, you know, world schooling, traveling around the place schooling. And we too had been at that unschooling conference with Peter Gray, although we didn't know each other at that time, and were very inspired by that. So when we met, we were both thinking along the same lines of a place basically where the children could go and be with other children. We were both kind of doing the homeschool meetups and that, and as Maura said, they were a little bit lacking in the ability for the children to develop deep relationships with each other. So that's where we started, really, was let's set a place up. And we were both pretty diligent about it from the very beginning, and we straight away started into meeting every week. We read as much as we could about works from Summerhill and works from Sudbury as well. We weren't necessarily dead set on which model we would choose, or if we would choose any model in the very early days. So we started exploring all of that basically as part of our work in getting a school open. We didn't even call it a school, I don't think, necessarily in the early days. It was a place for self-directed learning and community. So yeah, we another lady then as well, Sarah, who used to come to the homeschooling meetups with us, and her son joined our group. So the three of us worked together, I'd say for about 6 or 7 months consistently every week, and we slowly went through a task list of things that we needed to do in order to get open. And that was everything from marketing to trying to find a place. Securing a location is always a real challenge for startups, to getting the word out there and finding our founding group of students as the pioneer students that were going to start with the school. Yeah, so we worked at that consistently from about January, I think, of 2018 till about June. We also needed to find funds to open it, and we were very lucky to secure a benefactor who was happy to help us open, or help us buy or rent or you know, get a loan to get a building. And so I think coming towards about June of that year, after we'd had maybe 3 or 4 public meetings, we did film screenings. The Sudbury Valley School documentation was really helpful. They have a document on the concrete steps one needs to follow to start a Sudbury school. So we used that as a bit of a template. And then we happened upon this building that we're in now. One day we were looking at other buildings and driving around the countryside trying to find a place. We'd had a couple of meetings with the local county council, the planning officers, trying to find a place that they would be happy for us to be in, which is kind of a bit of a challenge here, and I'm sure in most states as well. Finding a place that has the right zoning for a school like this, which is kind of an unschooled school. And yeah, so we found this building by chance. One day we were driving home from another house visit, and it was completely overgrown and behind a load of hedgerows, and we kind of crawled in behind a few bushes and sneaked in to have a look and see what the building was. And it was an old national school basically, so we'd kind of come to the thinking that we needed to be in a disused school, which there were quite a lot of in Ireland, because a lot of old national schools, community schools, were amalgamated together many years ago, and new schools were built in central locations. So there are quite a lot of old national schools dotted around the country. Anyway, we found it, we contacted the people who owned it, and we were very lucky that they agreed to sell it to us pretty much straight away. We spent 6 weeks renovating it over the summer. In the meantime, we were continuing to secure our list of students for the September, and we were very lucky then to open with 15 students in September, and a lovely community of parents and family members. And yeah, we opened our doors on the 6th of September. I make it sound all very easy, but it was still very, we always think of the word serendipity when we think of the process we went through and continue to go through with expansion, and everything that the things that we need when we need them tend to show up for us. Obviously we work hard, and we're dedicated to it, and we have an amazing team here, but yeah, it all flows very nicely and has done from the beginning.
It's so great to hear your startup steps using the resources from Sudbury Valley. The Sudbury Valley School has that starter kit for schools that want to be modeled after that. And then the process of hosting these community meetings and finding space and finding funding and renovating your space and all of that. Really interesting to hear. I'm curious, and maybe Maura, you can talk a little bit about this, of the 15 students that you began with in the fall of 2018. Were they people who had already been homeschooling, had been familiar with self-directed education? Were their families where this was entirely new to them? What was that early cohort like?
Funnily enough, Carrie, we expected that a lot of homeschoolers would be really interested in this model, because that's where I was coming from, and also Gayle, sort of as a stepping stone from her experience in education, had moved into homeschooling. But our children were the only homeschooled children here, actually. All of the others were either transitioned out of mainstream or were simply young and that this was their first experience of school. So a bit of a mix, a combination.
And so where are you now, Maura, in terms of enrollment, and how has the composition of the school changed over these last 4+ years?
We're now at almost 80 students. I think 78 is our exact number right at the moment. We've always taken more than one sort of intake each year. So we tend to take one in September and then another one at some point mid-year, and try and keep those groups that are kind of coming on board reasonably small so that they can assimilate into the community and the community can absorb them. And get to know each other, on an individual level, so that there aren't large groups of people coming in changing the culture, So it's been quite smooth, really, I have to say, and quite gradual. Each year we sort of just build on the year before, and we haven't lost too many, so we've had very little attrition, that's for me been one of the most positive things. It's sort of the biggest evidence for us that what we're doing is satisfying to people, and people are finding what they need here, and not needing to leave. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say about that. We have a nice mix of ages. I mean, it's all been very balanced right throughout in terms of the mix of genders and the mix of age ranges right throughout, from young all the way up to 17. So we have children here who are 5 all the way up to 17 years of age.
Yeah, and that mixed age learning environment is so crucial to the Sudbury model, specifically that provides opportunities for older students to be role models and mentors to younger students, and younger students to learn from their older peers, and then not making assumptions around who you should be friends with or who you should be spending time with, that it's much more interest driven as opposed to age segregated as a conventional schooling environment might be. And so, Gayle, could you tell us a little bit about, for people not familiar with the Sudbury model, tell us a little bit about what that looks like for the Sligo Sudbury School?
Yeah, so, well, every day can look a little bit different, and depending on the children that are here, the children that you might look at on a particular day, the day can look very different as well. So We have the children here can start any time from 8:30 to 10:30. So we have a flexible opening and a flexible closing. They can finish from 2:30 to 4:30. They're free to go about their day as they want, and they're free to direct their own learning as they want as well. So there's a combination of, there are some structured activities. The timetable is really in place for the staff, more so to help us manage our time. And the children, if they want to, can join in those activities. Most of them come from requests from students. So we operate kind of a mentoring program so that everybody is having a one-to-one chat with a staff member at some point. Obviously that happens frequently during the week, but that there's a dedicated one-to-one either every week or every second week. So through those meetings, we try to really check in with the children and make sure that they're feeling emotionally, physically safe, that they're working on anything that they want to be working on. And through that system, then we might get a request from a child. Say they might say, "Oh, I want to learn guitar, but I haven't figured out how to, book a space in the music room yet," or they haven't managed to negotiate the systems that we have in place at school, because some of it can be, daunting and a little bit overwhelming depending on the student. So through that, then we may set up some lessons, or some of the activities would just be one-to-one. So you'd see a wide range of different things happening. There's a huge amount of play, both in the younger ages and in the older ages. A huge amount of outdoor play. We've got a really lucky to have a really nice outdoor space here. We have a small astro pitch, like a multi-purpose pitch, and a barn and a big field and lots of trees. So there's always children out playing, swinging, walking on a tightrope, doing lots of different physical activities, playing football, handball, different team games and things like that. We have a big group who are really interested in music in the school, which is absolutely amazing. And this year we managed to increase the size of the music room. So that's really developed kind of, and has had space to grow. There's a couple of school bands. So you can always hear some bit of rock and roll or death metal or trad music coming out of the music room. Yeah, and there's lots and lots of different, everything you can think of, lots of different activities going on, baking, cooking, lots of gaming. So there's a combination of children really engaged in individual tasks, maybe on their own. Some of our oldest students now are preparing for international GCSE exams. So there's in the morning time, you'd often see quite a lot of either individuals or small groups working on kind of exam-based academics. And then throughout the day, you'll just see either mixed age groups or similar age groups of children playing together, engaging in different activities together. Today, for example, we have it was a Christmas party day, so we run this thing called Pop-Up Cafe every now and then, because some of the children are really interested in cooking and learning about how to work in restaurants and that. So we cooked Christmas dinner for 90 people today, the students and some of the staff together, and had a big meal together and celebration and gift giving. And yeah, so I don't know if that helps.
It's so lovely.
Very, very varied. I'm sure you're familiar with it as well. Yeah. But yeah, lots of variety.
Yeah, and in the Sudbury model, I think it's interesting to note is this is not a franchise. Each individual Sudbury school may sort of take the name Sudbury as inspired by Sudbury, but the schools are, independently owned and operated, and kind of you bring in your own flavor and your own interpretations of the Sudbury model. So it's likely that no two look the same, and that maybe no two are, exactly like the original Sudbury Valley School either, but very much inspired by that overall model. And one of the key tenets to the Sudbury model, Maura, maybe you could talk about, is this democratic decision making and the ways in which the school community, staff, and students work together to establish various rules and structures and enforce those rules and structures and change those rules and structures as the case may be. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that looks.
Yeah, well, we adopted the Sudbury model, it very much in that way. in terms of the school meeting is basically how all of the decisions and all of we call them agreements now instead of laws. Some of the language of Sudbury we felt didn't really fit our culture, but this was a gradual process. Again, it's sort of been evolving from the beginning to now. And of course, as we grow and as there are more voices and more opinions, then these things have changed somewhat over the last 4 years. So we use the term agreements rather than laws now. But those agreements are made together at school meeting, and any student or staff member in the community, any school meeting member, as they're known, can make or propose an agreement, or propose to change an agreement, or propose anything that they wish to introduce to the community at the school meeting. And then that's heard at 2 meetings. So there's 2 hearings of each proposal, and then proposals are voted on. And again, rather than a sort of straight up democratic vote, which we did in the beginning, now we've moved towards somewhat more of a consensus type decision-making process, because it felt sometimes a little bit,
Polarizing.
a little bit polarizing when a decision might have been just split just shy of 50% or just over 50. And then you have a lot of disgruntled people. And so we moved towards more of a consensus. So that takes a little bit longer sometimes. So we have quite long discussions sometimes at school meeting, but it works out in the long run with a happier community, I think. And then everyone's more on board, you know.
And then in terms of enforcing those agreements, how does that work?
Enforcing is an interesting word too. The community, well, I suppose the community enforces the agreements on each other, or we enforce them on each other, in the sense that the agreement has been made, and anyone who is not complying with that agreement can be brought to JC. Now, again, we've changed the language somewhat, so we still kept the JC. It's still known as JC, but our JC, rather than it being the Justice Committee or the Judicial Committee, is the Just Chat Committee. So we invite people to come and have a chat, because quite more often than not, the sort of not adhering to the agreement is either a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of the implications of not adhering to the agreement, or the consequences on others, or knock-on effect of not adhering to agreement. So really, you know, we're dealing with children of all ages and all stages of development. And so we try and I suppose, bring them on board rather than simply enforce a law with a consequence or some form of penalty, you know, for not adhering to the law. And that's been problematic over, you know, at times over the last 4 years, because of course you're dealing with, of course, people coming into a community who may have very different ideas about what justice looks like or how infringements should be dealt with. But as a community, we're constantly trying to communicate with each other and sort of find agreement, find common ground with all of that.
And so, Gayle, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about, you know, the learning that takes place at Sudbury Valley, because it doesn't look, at Sudbury, it's the Sligo Sudbury School modeled after Sudbury Valley, because Sudbury schools, you know, there isn't a set curriculum. It's nothing like a conventional school. It's non-coercive, so most things are not required, except, of course, for these agreements that the community has decided upon. So how does learning happen without a kind of standard curriculum in a Sudbury school, and specifically Sligo Sudbury School?
I think the simplest way to put it is that the children are just learning through living. They're living life, and they're experiencing and they're exploring, and there's a lot of play, as I said earlier on. So they're learning by doing, and it's very active. It's a very active and applied version of learning, I suppose. And we do teach some things explicitly when it's requested. We have a phonics program that we teach to younger children, and some of them like to do phonics, some of them like to do a more whole reading based approach. So there are things that look quite like school sometimes going on at school as well, and some children are following maths programs and things like that as well. But yeah, I think for the most part it's through application and exploration and following their natural curiosities and their natural tendencies to learn as young mammals do, so capably. Yeah, and then it does change as time goes on. There's a lot of play and exploration in the younger ages, and as time goes on, we tend to see around 9, 10, 11, the 9 to kind of 13-year-olds, there's a bit of a shift in how they're approaching their learning, or how they're approaching even their day and their experience here, and how they engage with the school. And there can be a tendency there, again, generalizing a little bit, everybody's different, but there can be a tendency to among some of the students to look for a little bit more structure maybe, or look for a bit more support with goal-oriented achievements and tasks and things like that. And so we help with that when it comes up, and we support with anything, I suppose, as it comes up and as the child needs it. We try our best to support them with what they're asking for specifically in that moment. And then with the older students then as well, I suppose we would see that they can become, some of them, quite goal oriented and quite focused on then the next steps, and starting to think about what's going to happen next when they leave our school, and starting to think then about yeah, maybe university or working or traveling or whatever path they're choosing to follow, and putting in place the things they need to put in place then to be prepared, I guess, for when they leave. Yeah, so it's really, really varied, but I think that as I said, the best way to describe it is that they're living their lives and they're learning what they need to learn as they need to learn it.
And if I can just follow up there for a moment, Gayle, you mentioned in talking about the experience that you had as a child and an adolescent going through a Summerhill-inspired school, that eventually that school became much more conventional, kind of moved away from that self-directed approach. Do you ever worry about that same thing happening with the Sligo Sudbury School? And if so, how do you manage that?
That's a really good question, and really interesting thing to think about. I don't actually personally worry about that, but I do.
As long as we're here, that won't happen.
Yeah. I do think, and I think it's quite a common occurrence as well. Like, we'd have an example of another kind of organization or association of schools here that started maybe a couple of decades ago, and they were at the outset trying to be more democratic, and they were in some ways. There's more parental involvement and things, but as soon as they became established as a school group and a school movement, and then was started to receive state funding, the ethos was very much eroded. I think there was a lot of compromises needed to be made. So it is a really interesting thing for us to bear in mind, and we will be considering it as we develop. And we're also hoping to kind of develop a network of these kind of schools across the country over the next 10 years or so. We're already working together with the 3 other existing Sudbury schools in the country to support more schools to open. We really do want to see this educational approach being available to everybody, or as many people as want it. But I think, to be more specific about your question, I think a really good board as well. We have a very strong board of management, and we have a really strong group of staff as well, who are very focused on the vision and the mission of the school. So yeah, it's not something I'm worried about at the moment. I think it's very different times as well. I think it was a really brave thing for those people to do back in those days. I mean, in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, opening schools like this, you know, they were extremely radical and considered extremely progressive. But there's just so many of us now, I think. Now, even still, some people still think this approach they haven't heard of it yet. But I think we're starting to begin to reach a bit of a tipping point. It's getting more and more common. It's getting more people are more aware now, I think, of the fact that there are alternatives. And I think it might be just an easier time to be able to have a school open like this and to be able to stick to our fundamental principles.
I love your goals for expanding this model and building up a support system of schools like this throughout Ireland over the coming decade. That's exciting to hear about, and I'll look forward to watching that. Maura, I wonder, what do you think about the future of Sudbury schooling and self-directed education? Do you agree with Gayle that this is a bit of a tipping point, that there is more interest in these alternative models? And if you do, why do you think that is at the moment?
I do agree with Gayle, and I do think that this is a tipping point. I think that more and more, I just think our society, I mean, in so many ways, is changing radically and has done in the last couple of decades. It's just speeding up, and traditional educational models have not evolved, I think, to keep up with that. And just even in terms of technology and the kinds of access that most children, anyway, in the Western world at least, have access to knowledge and information at their fingertips that was just inconceivable a couple of decades ago. And there are parents now of children who have grown up with that kind of access, and so their idea of what's possible is radically different, I think, to the generation that went before them. And for that reason, I can't see any other way except a change. And so either the model that the traditional models will change, will evolve, or more and more people will choose, I think, an alternative way of educating their children. And obviously there's a reluctance, on some level, because it's risky, I suppose, in the mindset of a lot of people. The idea of leaving school without an approved accreditation or some kind of qualification might leave you exposed. But I think there's more and more people who are succeeding in the world, and succeeding in very dramatic ways, without that kind of formal learning and without that kind of formal accreditation, which gives people confidence, I think, in embracing something different.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So Gayle, as we begin to wrap up, you talked a bit about some of the experiences you had in starting a school. Many of my listeners are individuals who are considering launching some kind of micro school or low-cost private school or learning center or homeschooling collaborative. Many of them work in conventional schools and are wondering about making a leap there, similar to what you did. I know you mentioned zoning as being an issue. It seems like an international problem for education entrepreneurs. I'm always hearing about that here in the United States as a main challenge. So looking back at your time 4 plus years ago, launching the school, what advice do you have for new education entrepreneurs who maybe could learn from some of those experiences from you?
Good question. I suppose, I think getting the founding group, the people that you're working with, your team, your core team at the very beginning, really strong and really based on trust, really strong relationships, essentially, that everybody's got each other's backs. They're going to do the tasks that are assigned to them, and they're going to hold each other, I suppose, to the underpinning principles that you choose, your non-negotiable values. I think that's really important, to make sure that you all have those, you can agree on those as well. I think in our experiences here, helping other schools to start up, one of the things that is most difficult for people can be that securing a really strong core team. Sometimes these kind of organizations or these setups can attract people who are looking for something different, or looking for something that's maybe anti-authoritarian or something like that, but it's not, it's difficult to form a cohesive group at the beginning. But I think if you can get that right and form a cohesive group, everyone's on the same page, and they're not bringing their own personal things to the group, but they're all there to show up to get the school started. That's a massive, and even if the group is small, our group ended up being Maura and I after 6 or 7 months. And some people say you need a group of 7, you need a group of 8, but I think even if there's only two of you and you're dedicated and committed and you can get the work done, I think that's great. And then, yeah, early on, being aware early on as you can of the challenges and the things that you need to know from a legal point of view. Like we had, quite early on conversations with our planners, for example, regarding zoning. So we didn't waste a huge amount of time going down rabbit holes looking for different premises and expecting to be able to have a facility in a domestic dwelling or different places like that. We knew early on what we had to find, and I think that would be mainly it. My main advice, and just be really consistent and take it really seriously. Like we met every week. We dealt with it, or we approached it like a very serious business, and we ran it as a business, taking minutes, recording our accounts very clearly, all of those things from the get-go. And I think the experiences of the other startups, I'd have to say there's 3 more schools at the moment that are just on the cusp of opening. They all hope to open in September, and I'm just thinking through the strengths that they have, and I think that would be mainly them as well. They're really good, strong teams. They've worked a lot on making sure that they're all communicating really clearly with each other, that they can trust each other if there's a disagreement in the group to go back maybe and reflect on things and be open and considerate to each other. And they're also very practical, I think, and pragmatic, and they're hardworking.
Oh, great advice. So, Maura, if my listeners and viewers are interested in connecting with you at Sligo Sudbury School and following what's happening in your growing community in Ireland around self-directed education, what is the best way for them to connect?
They can sign up to our mailing list, which they can access through our website, sligosudburyschool.com. We're also on Facebook. Sligo Sudbury School, I think, is our handle. I'm sorry, I don't know. And Instagram. But probably the mailing list is probably the best way. We do send a monthly newsletter to everybody on that. So we won't sort of inundate you with material, but we try and keep people up to date that way.
Wonderful. Well, I wish you well with your ongoing growth and success and inspiration for other schools in Ireland. Maura Duignan and Gayle Nagle, thank you again for being on the LiberatED podcast.
Thank you, Carrie.